Good evening. Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center is so excited to be kicking off the 2026, that's hard to say, just 5 days, 6 days in, Lakin Lecture Series on Antisemitism. And we're very pleased to have all of you here with us tonight and those of you who are here remotely on Zoom. This series, now in its third year, is dedicated to exploring the nature of anti-Semitism, of fostering dialogue, and promoting social justice and human rights. Our goal is to educate our community, Jews and non-Jews alike, about the dangers of anti-Semitism and to offer practical strategies for combating hatred and bigotry through awareness, advocacy, and coalition building. The Lakin Lecture Series on Antisemitism is made possible by a grant from the Alma and Eddie Lakin Education Fund. This incredibly special fund was established at the Jewish Community Foundation of Southern Arizona by their daughter to honor Alma and Eddie's lifelong commitment to Holocaust education, the people of Israel, to Jewish life, and to combating anti-Semitism and advocating for social justice. And of course, this series is presented in proud partnership with Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona and the Tucson JCC. Each year, this series tackles a range of complex and timely subjects. It helps encourage personal and communal reflection and growth. In fact, while this is a lecture series, we hope that the dialogue that each of these lectures sparks doesn't just end here in this ballroom. Our goal is to always invite and encourage a diversity of opinions and lived experiences, because we recognize when everyone brings their story to the table to share, we all learn and benefit. This year's theme is centered on exploring what it means to be individually and collectively Jewish today in the face of so many challenges. These challenges are local, they're national, global, international, they are complex, they are political, and they're personal. And from all of them come great opportunities for us to fight anti-Semitism, affirm our beliefs, demand inclusivity, promote equality, and build stronger identities and communities. Tonight, we are kicking off the Lakin Lecture Series in a rather unorthodox format, from our usual setup anyway. So we beg a little bit of grace and your patience tonight as we wade into tech territory that may challenge my sanity and our normal process. As you know, we love to bring amazing speakers and presenters here to our Southern Arizona home. We want to show them the warmth of our fabulous city and of our citizens. Unfortunately, for tonight's speaker, this wasn't possible because of the exact challenges that we are about to discuss. Dr. Peter Hotez is joining us tonight online instead of in person because he has recently had to alter his travel plans based on physical threats to his safety. So why is Dr. Hotez under threat? Well, I'm going to share a little of his very truncated credentials with you, and it might help you understand some of the challenges that he is facing. Peter J. Hotez, MD and PhD, is Dean, I'm going to just straight read, guys, is Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine and Professor of Pediatrics and Molecular Virology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine. where he is also the co-director of the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development and Texas Children's Hospital's endowed chair of tropical pediatrics. He's also university professor at Baylor University, senior fellow in disease and humanity at the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy. Dr. Hotez is a vaccine scientist, a biochemist, and a pediatrician who has led or co-led the development of vaccines for parasitic infections, as well as coronavirus vaccines, including 2 low-cost COVID vaccines for global health that have so far been administered to over 100 million children and adults in India and across Indonesia. Peter Hotez has authored 6 books, including Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, about his own daughter, Preventing the Next Pandemic, and The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science. And he just released in September of 2025, he co-authored Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. He wrote that with scientist Michael Mann. Additionally, he is the author of more than 700 scientific papers, and he is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and numerous American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he has received numerous awards. In fact, he has received so many awards that there's too many for me to mention. I chose just a few that stand out for me. He has received the Mendel Medal in Science and Religion from Villanova University, the Milton Popkin Award from the ADL of the Southwest, the LBJ Moral Courage Award from the Holocaust Museum, Houston, the Walker Prize from Boston Science Museum, the Smith Medal in Public Health from New York Academy of Medicine. He was recently named in 2024 Time Magazine Health 100 and one of 25 global leaders for U.S. News and World Report in 2025. Seriously, when I say that he is accomplished, it is woefully an understatement. His vita is 487 pages long. So while I may not have time to share all of his degrees, papers, and awards, what I must take time to say is this. Dr. Peter Hotez is an ardent vaccine advocate and science explainer who works tirelessly to combat anti-science and anti-Semitism here in the United States and globally. I hope that you will all join me as we welcome Dr. Hotez, if not to our city, to our screen.
My father's side are what my mother's sometimes disparagingly would say are glitzy honors from Western Ukraine, Eastern Poland. My mother's side is named Goldberg, and I'm actually a cousin of Ruth Lizowski, aka Ruth Rabinowitz, from my mother's side on the lower left there, and that's getting married to my other cousin, Rabbi Phil Lizowski, a rabbi in Bloomfield, who was, they were 2 of the Jews in the forest who were, hidden by the partisans, and there's actually a book about them. But he's still alive. He's 98. He's was the rabbi in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and chaplain of the Hartford police department. And so I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, kind of shielded from anti-Semitism, and never really gave it a whole lot of thought. I'd heard about it in Hebrew school, but it was very abstract, and it was only in the last decade or so that I really started getting attacked from being a Jew, and I got interested in it. enough to start writing about it and speaking about it. And that's what it's about tonight. So I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes or so, and then I understand there's a panel afterwards, and hopefully we can open it up to questions. So my passion is making vaccines. I'm a professor at this ginormous Texas medical center. I actually took that picture from a Southwest Airlines flight. If you fly into Hobby Airport, it often flies over the medical center. We do everything big in Texas. I've been in Texas about 15 years. They created for me this opportunity to build a big center for vaccine development to make vaccines that the big pharma companies wouldn't make, as well as creating the School of Tropical Medicine. And that's been a lifelong ambition and dream to make these vaccines. I was trained I have a medical degree and a PhD in biochemistry from New York at Weill Cornell Medical College and Rockefeller, and then moved to Texas to create this incredible center where we're making vaccines for things like hookworm anemia and schistosomiasis and malaria. I like to call them the most important diseases you've never heard of. Chagas disease. And then a while back, we got approached by a group that was working on coronavirus vaccines before anybody really cared about them. This is for the original severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, in 2002, and then Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And that was fortuitous because we had learned how to make coronavirus vaccines, so that when the COVID-19 sequence came online in January 2020, we were able to pivot and make a low-cost vaccine for COVID. So this is among the problems that we work on, vaccines, and really tikkun olam, vaccines for the world's poorest people. This is a map. I won't go into the biology or much of the science tonight, but this is a map of where our diseases for hookworm and schistosomiasis and malaria occur. In the green and in the red, and just imagine for a bit that you're the chief executive officer of a biotech or a pharma company. This is probably not the map you want in your business plan, right? Because your financial return is all about North America and U.S. and Canada and Europe. So one of the things we struggle with is, what is the business model? I think there is one, but this is what we're trying to do: make vaccines for people who can't afford to pay for it, and that went along with COVID-19. So when we were all vaccinated by the middle of 2021, unfortunately, the low and middle income countries were not, because the mRNA technology and the particle technology could not be scaled in time to make it for the African continent and South Asia. This is a bubble map where people were not getting vaccinated, and because they had known at Texas Children's Hospital in Baylor we were making a low-cost version like we did for our hookworm vaccines and schistosomiasis vaccines. We were getting frantic phone calls from ministers of health and ministers of science in low-income countries to see if we could help. So, even though I was going late into the night, going on CNN and MSNBC, talking to Don Lemon on CNN or Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC, it also meant getting up at 4 or 5 every morning after we literally sent our prototype vaccine via World Courier to these countries, to then work with them on the scale up to get to them and close of business their time. But it worked, and our vaccine for our COVID vaccine for India got scaled and reached 75 million adolescents. We partnered with this organization in India called Biological E. That's one of their big vaccine producers, and therefore they named it Corbevax. So we transferred the ownership. We did this no patent, no strings attached, just because we thought it was the right thing to do. And the vaccine that we made in our laboratories in the Texas Medical Center, Texas Children's Hospital in Baylor, reached 75 million adolescents. So that was a great feeling. And then we, one of the other interesting spins, we did the same for Indonesia. The interesting spin on Indonesia was, we had explained to them that our technology is actually a vegan technology: no animal cells, human cells, animal proteins, human proteins. When they heard that, they got interested because, as you know, Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim majority country. And they worked with their clergy and got our vaccine certified as halal. So we wound up making the first halal, first and only halal COVID vaccine. I guess it's kosher too, but it wasn't designated as kosher in Indonesia, but it was designated as halal. So it was really good to, make that contribution. So we wound up getting over 100 million people vaccinated with a low-cost version of a COVID vaccine that we developed in our laboratories. And that was a lifelong ambition and dream realized. The problem now is, and this kind of gets us closer to the main topic of what I wanted to talk about, we've had it's kind of a freeze in our ability to vaccinate the world's children, and the World Health Organization has sounded an alarm that we've plateaued in our ability to vaccinate the world's children. I like to say it's a picture of me in the monk painting over there. So they're trying to catch up, but what it's really about is the rise of anti-vaccine activism that really accelerated in the United States over the last couple of decades is now moving across the world into Europe, into low and middle income countries. And in the U.S. side now, measles has returned to America, pertussis, whooping cough has returned to America, chronic hepatitis B and liver cancer are next. And it's important to understand what this is all about, because I think, too often we tend to, use euphemisms, or we call it misinformation or infodemic. It's not random junk out there in the internet. It's organized, it's deliberate, and has both political and financial drivers. So what happened was I got involved in this in an interesting way. I met my wife Ann in New York when I was an MD PhD student on the Upper East Side of New York at Rockefeller University and Weill Cornell Medical College in the 1980s. To tell you how long, to just give you a sense how long ago it was, Ann and I lived in Rockefeller Institute housing for $44 a month on the Upper East Side. So it was really a long time ago. And with this dream of making vaccines for the world, and then, as John Lennon says, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. We had 4 adult kids, including my son Matt, who lived in Tucson, and his wife Brooke, but also Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And it was about almost 10 years ago, I got asked by the National Institutes of Health to explain to Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., why vaccines don't cause autism. And I wound up having a year of conversations with him, mediated by Tim Shriver, who was a Kennedy of sorts. And it really, you can tell it wasn't very successful and really didn't go anywhere. But I wound up writing a book about it with the very straightforward title, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism. And that's what started making me public enemy number 1 or 2 with anti-vaccine groups, because it went against their ideology. And that's when, the death threats started, and, and Kennedy went after me and wrote false things about me in his books and this kind of stuff. But it also made me an expert in the anti-vaccine movement. So let me just briefly tell you about that, because, it's had various iterations with false claims that vaccines cause autism, and that started about 20 plus years ago. And then around 10 years ago, it took a political spin around health freedom, medical freedom. You can't tell us what to do with our kids. And then now it's been globalizing aggressively. So what we saw in California about 10 years ago was this rise in anti-vaccine sentiment, and parents weren't vaccinating their kids, and this caused so many kids were not getting vaccinated because parents were worried about autism that it caused a big measles epidemic in California in 2014, 2015. And the California legislature responded by shutting down vaccine exemptions. They said, okay, from now on, if you want your kids to go to school, they have to be vaccinated, and I supported that. But it produced a backlash in states like my state of Texas under this next version of anti-vaccine activism that were saying that, you can't tell us what to do. So, I'd spent a lot of time debunking the autism, explaining the genes involved in autism spectrum disorder. We had done genomic sequencing on Rachel, but then now we had this new issue to deal with, where the politics, and you got people like Alex Jones weighing in and others. And you saw this steep rise in non-medical vaccine exemptions in Texas, over 100,000 kids. And that's what came off the rails during COVID-19. So this is a pattern here of the COVID deaths in Texas. It's probably pretty similar to Arizona. This is deaths on the y-axis. This is dates on the x-axis, 2020, 2021. This is the original wave that came in of deaths in Texas in the summer of 2020. Here's the alpha wave. Here's the delta wave over here, and here's the BA1 Omicron wave. And this big green arrow is when vaccines became freely and widely available. And you see in Texas, almost as many Texans died after the green arrow as before the green arrow. And that's because so many Texans refused to take a COVID vaccine. So of the 100,000 deaths that we had in Texas, almost half were needless deaths. And now that's spilling over into childhood immunizations. It explains our terrible measles epidemic that we had in West Texas and up in Oklahoma and Kansas and Colorado and New Mexico. And then, of course, the second nidus where you are in Arizona and Utah, now a third one in South Carolina. So we're losing our measles elimination status, and been trying to communicate that effectively. And the problem is, this made me then a target both from politically motivated anti-vaccine groups, and there was also a big component of the wellness and influencer industry. Have you ever noticed why there are always anti-parasitic drugs like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or fenbendazole? It's because you can buy them in bulk and then repackage them and jack up the price and sell it with a $1,600 telehealth visit. And I was saying, well, no, that's not what works. What works is vaccinating. So I became the target of all these conspiracy theories. They had me plotting the pandemic. They even made up a word. They called it the plandemic, and they were saying that I was going to disrupt the Trump administration, all of this nonsense, because I really don't consider myself a political person at all. And then, these are some of the nicer pictures of me on the internet. And when Steve Bannon calls you a criminal, that's pretty serious stuff. I mean, talk about an authoritative source. And then, the emails came in the stalkings, and I won't shock you with all the emails, but, this is an example, where this guy here writes, he puts it all in the subject line, doctor, I use that term loosely, Hotez, you print one more paper or blog suggesting the roundup of free citizens, which of course I don't, but that's where the health freedom, medical freedom stuff comes in, to get an unproven, untested shot that's no more a vaccine than an M&M is, which is nonsense, of course, that I will suggest to all my patriot friends that you be hunted. So the army of patriots coming to hunt me down. And so, not that I like to compare myself to Galileo, but I'll guess I'll take it. And in response, I teamed up with the climate scientist Michael Mann, who had been similarly attacked for his views on climate science. And this is the new book that came out a few months ago called Science Under Siege, to really, outline and describe this whole anti-vaccine ecosystem. But alongside it, and this is really what I wanted to focus on in my remarks tonight, was, this whole wave of anti-Semitism that came with it. And so, I became the trifecta. I was not only a scientist and a vaccine scientist, but a Jewish vaccine scientist. And you saw all of these old anti-Jewish tropes come running back. And so Twitter was a big venue for the promotion of anti-Semitic viewpoints and stuff like Hotez, yet another schizophrenic, psychopathic Jew promoting the Jew death jab, which is what they call vaccines, or these, memes from Weimar Germany, where, they have this very Aryan, nice-looking mom with her baby and this, sort of hideous, cartoonish Jewish doctor, plotting horrible things. So the COVID vaccine is still poison, and Peter Hotez is still a Jew. And it goes on, know your enemy, Peter Hotez is Jewish, there's a Jew in the story, best to get your children safe in the room. And this is all condoned by Elon Musk and Twitter, and nobody was even very, surprised by it. It just became normal for me to get anti-Semitic remarks like this on Twitter on a regular basis. Hotez, another Ashkenazi Jew attracted to tyranny, no surprises, and the yellow Jewish stars, and I started seeing these kinds of pictures where this cartoonish Jew in a biohazard suit making the virus or trying to ignite the pandemic. And I started then reaching out to the and no, actually, it was the Anti-Defamation League that reached out to me. And so if you ever wonder what the ADL does, I mean, Dina Marks at the ADL Southwest chapter said, "Hey, Peter, we see what's going on here." And I said, "How did you see what's going on?" It turns out they have a monitoring center in Chicago that will pick up stuff like this on the chatter. So she reached out to me, and what was interesting is, I was sort of mortified by it all. She said, "Don't be mortified." I said, "We're here to help you." And they contacted law enforcement. When the death threats came, they arranged for a Houston Police Department cruiser to be out in front of my house. And then I started getting the swastikas sent to my home on a few occasions. And they often came like this, swastikas in the shape of syringes or masks. This one had twice it had a Michigan postal address, so I'm not sure what that means. And then, it kept on coming. So, you started to see memes like this. So I was being grouped with other, prominent Jews like Rochelle Walensky, who's a friend who heads the CDC, and this is Andy Slavitt in the Biden administration, who was involved in healthcare, and this kind of reverse psychology of getting compared to a Mengele, it's an excuse for using Nazi images. So there's some of the emails that I'd get, Peter, 75 years ago, people like you, and they just love using any kind of Nazi image. It's an excuse to vet it. 75 years ago, people like you were tried, convicted, hung by the neck until dead. There's a lawyers committee right now collecting the names of people to be indicted by Nuremberg crimes. So one of the things they put out there is they say there's going to be a time when the Jewish scientists all get tried at Nuremberg, and it's going to be kind of get even as a result. And then he says, "May the force be with you." And then there's another one. How does it feel to be a medical fascist? Why do you lie? You're one disgusting man. You peddle fear, and your obsession in vaccines is gross. You sick son of a kosher pickle eater. It must be something in the, I don't know, some other language translation. You're killing millions, perhaps billions, with your pro-genetic engineered vaccine propaganda. I know you give autoimmune diseases, which is nonsense, and early death. I hope you enjoy maggots, because when you die, you are burning in hell. That's the only companionship you'll have. So it was just this pretty steady drumbeat. So I got interested in it and started to reach out to colleagues and actually, looked at this kind of curious link between anti-science viewpoints and anti-Semitism. And there is a small, but there is some history to this. And I had trouble getting it published because I'm not really a social scientist, so I wasn't going into social science journals. And biomedical journals were looking like, I don't know what to do with this. And they mostly were not willing to publish it, but two did. So one was the Maimonides Medical Journal, out of Israel, and the other was Perspectives in Biology and Medicine, and they had me publish this paper on anti-science and anti-Semitism, and just to briefly, because I want to leave a lot of time to talk, one of the interesting things is just like being blamed for the pandemic or the pandemic or plandemic as they call it. There is this history of the Jews being blamed in the Rhineland in Germany in the 1300s during the Black Death, the plague, and the Christian majority population killed or expelled its Jews in approximately one half of the 363 cities with Jewish communities, and they accused Jews of poisoning the well. And when you read about the history of this, it's very interesting. Certain cities were already predisposed to anti-Semitism because they were located along the routes where knights traveled during the First Crusade in 1096. And it's also interesting that the plague first struck during certain Christian holidays, especially Easter, which for the Jews were blamed for the crucifixion. There's even one analysis which is quite interesting. This is by this guy Johnson here, did an economic analysis who showed that the communities that chose not to expel the Jews recovered much faster economically after the plague than those who did expel the Jews. And of course, this is what launched, I'm sure there's people in this room who know a lot more about it than I do, where people fled Central Europe to go to Eastern Europe, and this then started the whole Yiddish civilization in Poland and Eastern Europe, so that it's really the wave started in the 1300s. By the 1500s, most of the world's Jewish population was living in Poland and the Pale of the Settlement, and there's even a Yiddish Renaissance stimulated by the invention of the printing press, and centers of Jewish thought appeared in Krakow and Prague, and part of it was launched because of that. This is an interesting book written by David Rudderman at Penn, who's emeritus now, and he wrote a very interesting book called Jewish Thought and Scientific Discovery in Early Modern Europe. And one of his observations was when Jews first started getting into Western medicine, it was because they had created a very welcoming, the Venetians had created a very welcoming medical school. The first international medical school in Europe was in Padua in northern Italy. It welcomed Jewish students, and so you had Jews in the 1500s, if you can imagine this, were crossing the Alps to northern Italian university towns, and in Padua they could receive a modern medical education, and over 300 Jews received their medical diploma from Padua over a 200-year period, and several times more didn't necessarily get degrees, but they study there, and this created a whole cadre of Jews in medicine. And then fast forward to Weimar, Germany, you then had what was going on with the Jewish physicists, such as Einstein and Max Born and Otto Stern and Lisa Meitner and Otto Frisch and Fritz London and Felix Bloch, and there, what they used to call Einstein's theory of relativity at this time, they called it the Jewish fraud, because it wasn't easily verifiable at the time, as opposed to the more muscular Aryan science or experimental Aryan physics. And you had two prominent German physicists, Leonard and Stark, who sought to undermine Einstein and worked to expel the Jewish physicists out of the university. Many of them, interestingly, exiled to Turkey. Those who couldn't get to the U.S. or England wound up going to Turkey, and that was actually a sanctuary for Jewish scientists. And Einstein wrote letters on behalf of a lot of these scientists to get them installed as professors in Turkish universities, which is not very well known, but I found very interesting. And when I get criticized for talking about this subject or anything related to politics, I say, look, it's not that I enjoy talking about the politics. It's not what I signed up for. I mean, I didn't seek out the politics. The politics found me. And I was glad to find this letter from Einstein, who wrote a letter to Max von Laue at the Prussian Academy of Sciences in 1933, who similarly berated Einstein. And Einstein replied, "I do not share your view that the scientists should observe silence in political matters, i.e. human affairs in the broader sense. Does not such restraint signify a lack of responsibility?" And I think he's right. And this kind of continued, this idea that, you know, the Jews are seek control of the world. Mike Rothschild, who I subsequently met, is based in L.A., and he's not related to the Rothschilds, but he wrote this really fabulous book called Jewish Space Lasers after our friend Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene started saying that the Jews were aiming space lasers to start fires. But he wrote this book called The Rothschilds and 200 Years of Conspiracy Theories, and he says this began to accelerate in the 1700s when Mayer Amschel Rothschild and his sons emerged from the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt to revolutionize the banking world. And when that happened, you know, he was blamed for every terrible event that happened in Europe, whether it was the sinking of the Titanic or causing the Great Depression. And then this passed on for the Jews, creating the COVID pandemic as well. And of course, a lot of this is now being passed on to George Soros and the World Economic Forum. So there's a lot of stuff out there that says I'm secretly making the virus or making vaccines at a special lab at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and George Soros is working in the lab with me. I mean, the crazier it sounds, the more it seems to gain traction around these Jews and globalist tropes. And this is stuff coming out of, you know, Kennedy's camp. You know, this is before the pandemic, one of his people parading around in a yellow Jewish star comparing vaccines to the Holocaust. I mean, he's right in front of the Austin State Capitol in Texas. You know, it's offensive as hell. And you know, and they start comparing vaccines to the Holocaust and doing all of this Holocaust appropriation and even to the point of carrying around the yellow Jewish stars and writing the word "no-vax" in it to make it look like Hebrew letters. And in my view, it's designed to intimidate us. And by the way, it works pretty well. And so Deborah Lipstadt has spoken about this a little bit. She's written some good articles when she was in the Biden administration. And I've been trying to find ways to turn this into something positive, although it gets pretty dark at times. And I've been writing and speaking out about this concept of what I call science tikkun, because my cousin Rabbi Phil Lazowski taught me about this concept, and to create this kind of bioscience policy, diplomacy, and advocacy framework built around the ancient Hebrew concept of tikkun olam to address humanity's most pressing challenges and inspired by historical lessons from the Holocaust. So that's kind of the breathless big overview. As I said, I didn't want to speak for the whole hour. I wanted to give lots of time for panel and discussion, and so I'll stop there, and I'm in your hands.
I'm going to go live.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Hotez, thank you again. My name is Lynn Davis. I'm director of the Rabbi Joseph H. Gumbiner Community Action Project at Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. And it is my distinct pleasure to be moderating our continuing conversation. So I'd like to invite to the stage doctors Dan Linzer and Keith Dveirin and Steve Wool. And I'm going to give some brief introductions, and if they're too brief, gentlemen, please add whatever you would like. But immediately to my left is Dr. Daniel Linzer. He is a molecular biologist and academic administrator. He received his bachelor's degree in molecular biophysics and biochemistry from Yale University in 1976, a PhD in biochemical science from Princeton in 1980, and a National Institutes of Health postdoc fellowship at Johns Hopkins University of Medicine. He served as provost of Northwestern University from 2007 until 2017, having previously served as dean and associate dean of Northwestern's largest constituent school, the Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences, and until recently was president of Research Corporation for Science Advancement here in Tucson. Next is Dr. Keith Dveirin, and I'm sure some of these faces are familiar to many of you, who is a local pediatrician. He went to college at Stanford and medical school at the University of University of California, San Francisco. He did his pediatric residency at Seattle Children's Hospital and additional training in pediatric hematology oncology at the Fred Hutchinson Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. With his family, his wife Julie, who's a professor of psychology, been in Tucson since 1995. And then Dr. Stephen Wohl, who is a second-generation physician, graduated from the Duke University College of Medicine and is board certified in internal medicine with extensive training and experience in family medicine and geriatrics. He was chief of medicine at Tucson Medical Center from 2005 until 2009 and has served as clinical staff at TMC and in the Department of Medicine at the University of Arizona. So gentlemen, thank you all for joining us this evening. From a Jewish ethical perspective, Dr. Hotez's work speaks directly to pikuach nefesh, which is the obligation to save a life and our responsibility to one another as members of a shared community. And I think this talk was an important reminder that science is not abstract, it's a moral tool, and using it wisely is our collective responsibility. And I would just like to invite each of you to share, what came up for you in this conversation.
All right, I'll start. As I was originally kind of wondering why I'm on this panel, but I kind of sort of a confluence of kind of factors. As many of you know, my mother was a child Holocaust survivor, is a child Holocaust survivor. She's 89 years old, still living here in Tucson. And as a pediatrician, I do a lot of vaccination and am very pro-vaccination and understand the benefits of the vaccines that we have available to us and giving routinely up until now. And then, as some of you may know, I'm also the mohel in town. So I do all the brisses and the circumcisions. And it's just kind of an interesting confluence because, there's as Dr. Hotez was saying, we have the misappropriation of Holocaust imagery and symbolism being used in this anti-science context. I think of it as with this whole anti-science and anti-Semitism. It's like a Venn diagram. You have these two different circles that are overlapping, and and we're talking about the confluence of that. And then the anti-vaccine part of this anti-science, and then really the circumcision part is interesting too because people may not know this, but there is a very large anti-circumcision movement in the United States. It's been gaining traction for years. Circumcision rates have gone down in the United States. It used to be 75, 80%. It's about 65% now. And so there's anti-circumcision activists who call themselves intactivists. I did not make that word up. And they're at a lot of meetings. They're at pediatric meetings. They've protested here in Tucson before. In fact, several years ago, Rabbi Aaron and I were doing a bris on the same day that there was an anti-circumcision protest at the university. And actually, one of the questions I would have for Dr. Hotez, I'm curious, is just what he thinks about the anti-circumcision movement and how it fits in with this narrative of anti-science and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think part of it may be just in any kind of Jewish ritual or anything linked to Judaism is seen as something very dark, and there's unfortunately this rise of pro-Nazi sentiments arising with far-right elements in this country, and so it goes along. And unfortunately, they've adopted anti-vaccine activism, and you almost want to say to them, look, I'm not here to discuss your political views. That's your right as an American, but don't adopt this stuff because it's going to kill you. And we had 40 to 50,000 Texans needlessly died because they refused COVID vaccines. That's a lot of people, and 200,000 probably nationally, when I wrote about it in one of my books. And so this, putting ideology first is really troubling. And unfortunately, we now have anti-vaxxer in chief as head of Department of Health and Human Services. And what Kennedy's doing, just in the last 2 days, where he's trying to stop meningococcal meningitis vaccinations and rotavirus vaccinations. I mean, I'm sure we both took care of kids in the pediatric ICU, right, with meningococcal meningitis and septicemia, and kids losing limbs and going into kidney failure and permanent neurologic damage. And to watch this guy and his team try to bring it all back is truly shocking and heartbreaking. And then, of course, then the anti-Semitism kind of flows after it. So we definitely have our work cut out for us.
Thank Dr. Hotez for that excellent presentation and insights. My thoughts are, when I was here, is gratitude. Gratitude that I share a heritage with a man like Dr. Hotez, who's making a big difference. Gratitude for my Jewish heritage. And then also the gratitude to be a physician, for that opportunity to make a difference. Maybe in a small way, not like the large way Dr. Hotez has. And when I came to Tucson, I remember as a physician, and I had this, I guess, gratitude for the fact I had a good Jewish heritage based from my background, my parents, and when I went to medical school. And the best compliment I give Dr. Hotez is he reminds me, and he'll know who he was, Sam Katz, who was a mentor in medical school about measles vaccine. And he was one of the developers. Yeah. Excuse me?
Yes. A mentor for me as well. In fact, for years we co-edited a book together. So he's a giant. So.
And we would talk about Jack Benny, and he was related to Jack Benny too. So it was also a good thing about our Jewish heritage. And he would be turning over if he heard talking about what was the measles vaccine now. And I think the gratitude also
funny,
turns
one of the things I said to a colleague is, I'm so happy Sam is, not in some ways I'm happy Sam's not alive to see this. I don't think he could have handled it, or of course he would have, but you're absolutely right. I just jinxed you, I think. There you go, you're back on.
Book is something that I cherished when he signed to me. But most importantly was that gratitude of the Jewish heritage that we shared in changing the world. And when here tonight, and I hope that other physicians, is I worry. I worry about, when I first came to Tucson, there were many mentors here who shared that Jewish heritage. We had Maimonides group, we got together, and I feel that's going away somehow. And Keith and I have talked about that in this community, because what we do as physicians and Jews to change the world is we're responsible for education, like Dr. Hotez is, even in our small way, and to understand it. And on a daily basis, when we're in practice, representing myself as a Jew, as a physician, as a teacher is critical. And I worry that we're losing that sense. What happened when I was texting people, friends of mine who are physicians, last couple of days with this presentation, wondering would there be people here. I will share you, I was surprised. One of the physicians who I know looks at alternative methods, rather than say, I can't make it, oh, that sounds interesting, sent me a copy of an editorial criticizing Dr. Hotez and missing the entire point and saying to me, I'm not going to be there. And ultimately, like I said, this is the problem that we're seeing, that we as physicians need to, and Jewish physicians need to be very thankful and gratitude for the education we have, the responsibility we have, and the history that we have, because is when the Jewish intellectuals gave up on that issue, particularly in Germany, look what happened. So thank you, Dr. Hotez, for being here and for kind of invigorating my thoughts and beliefs about how important this is. Thank you.
Yeah, but to get to your point, about getting the points across, one of the things that I got interested enough that I even thought, well, wouldn't I got invited to speak at NYU. They've now created a Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. There are actually a couple of them. I think University of Massachusetts has one. And I said, why wouldn't it be amazing to set up something like that here in our Texas Medical Center, which is the world's largest medical center? And the pushback I got was really interesting. And to the point where one individual said, no, this would be equated with Islamophobia because, of course, bringing in all the October 7th stuff into it. And I said, well, wait a minute, I made the halal COVID vaccine for the Muslim world. I mean, I don't know how anybody could interpret, what I'm doing is Islamophobic, but, it still hasn't happened. So, and I don't think it's going to. So, the idea of creating a center for anti-Semitism in a medical school is just, it's not even on the radar screen, unfortunately.
So I come at this from a different perspective than the other three who spoke, because they're all at the interface of medical practice with the public. And the community at large is very different than the scientific community or the academic communities that I've been part of. Yes, I interact with parents of students or others, but within the scientific community, while many of us as Jews are, of course, aware of the history of anti-Semitism, we of this generation have not experienced that directly. I've never experienced it personally in my professional life, and I have not seen it on the campuses where I've been. As I mentioned earlier to some of you, I talked to the former provost at Duke, who had been provost for 15 years, and the former provost at Washington University in St. Louis, who had been provost for an insane period of 25 years. And both of them Jewish. At WashU, a chemist, at Duke, a political scientist, and asked them if they had ever experienced anti-Semitism personally, professionally, or on their campus. And they also said never. Despite that, when I was at Northwestern, the media characterized Northwestern as an anti-Semitic university. Why? Because of some unknown anecdote, some person saying something. College campuses frequently have students saying the darndest things, and sometimes that gets reported in a school paper or now in social media. My experience with the media may be different than others, has been that if the story doesn't have a sensational lead at the beginning, it doesn't get printed. And so when I have spent enormous amounts of time talking to reporters, including from the New York Times, and then seeing a sensationalized version that had nothing to do with what I said, it explains why things get amplified in very strange ways. And what I worry about is both the experiences that Peter described, but also the weaponization of anti-Semitism in the hands of others, including our current august government, which is attacking educational institutions because of this alleged anti-Semitism at institutions that there is no systemic anti-Semitism. And suddenly there is this attack, which again puts Jews in a very awkward position of being the reason that this administration is attacking Northwestern and Harvard and MIT and Hopkins and Berkeley and on, and it's insane. So I will stop there.
Thank you. And this is for any of the above. Maybe it's Dr. Hotez, maybe it's one of our panelists. But Dr. Wool, I appreciated you mentioning, pride and Jewish pride and legacy. And I'll say that I'm the daughter of a Jewish pediatrician and the granddaughter of a Jewish pediatrician and the great-granddaughter of a Jewish pharmacist. So I get it. That tradition feels meaningful, and Jewish contributions to medicine and science feel very meaningful. And I'm wondering, do you think, is there a lesson from Jewish history or tradition that feels most urgent in this moment in public health?
Me? I think what in public health is knowledge and education, and not to avoid the issues like this, like what even meant the political and the public health issues that came up during COVID. I remember sitting in the office alone during that period of time, and my role was not to worry about not making money or whatever, was to educate, to be there for the patients. And this is like this with Judaism and medicine, is to educate. And oftentimes patients want to know. It's not common that I've been able, just with background, share where anti-Semitism does come from and the history of anti-Semitism. Basically, as Dr. Hotez talked about, in the early 1900s, when Jews were then allowed into the German universities and competing, that led to this rise. But I think what it says is that our education, like he said, in a university setting, medical center, we should be proud of it, and we should continue to lifelong learning to educate others.
Lori, did you want to do some questions from the audience, or do we have a couple? Okay.
Okay, we're going to do something that most of you know is against everything that I have in my being, which I'm going to come out to you with the microphone. But what I'm going to tell you is, if you don't ask a question, I'm going to take the microphone back, because we do want to keep it question-oriented. So I know people have questions for Dr. Hotez and our panel. Who has the first question? All right.
Thank you. Just want to give a little background. My name is Jerry Martin. I'm a microbiologist and chemical engineer. I'm retired now, but I was the Director of Global Scientific Affairs for Pol Corporation, which is a producer of filters used in sterilizing vaccines and injectable drugs. And I worked all around the world with the vaccine manufacturers that worked on scaling up some of your vaccines, Dr. Hotez, so Biological E, for example, in India. Just as my question is that in my travels around the world and working to introduce vaccines around the world, I really never ran into anti-science or anti-Semitism on a global basis, introducing those vaccines into the world. It seems to me that this is primarily a little bit European, but primarily an American phenomenon with a relatively small number of people that get a lot of press coverage because, as you mentioned, you're getting, selling things. I want to know what we can do to counter the sensationalism of anti-Semitism and anti-vaccines that gets covered in the media, and how we can become more of a voice in the media for sanity and the validity of vaccines.
Yeah, no. So you packed a lot in there, and thank you for all your work. I have a good working relationship and a collaboration with someone at the University of London. Her name is Heidi Larson. She's a medical anthropologist, and she's looked at anti-vaccine sentiments and attitudes, all over the world, and she runs something called the Vaccine Confidence Project. And, for instance, she was looking at the Taliban and the assassination of polio workers in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and or anti-vaccine sentiments in France, and we never quite understood each other, because what I was talking about in the U.S. with the wellness and influencer industry and the and the far right and the attacks was so different from what she was seeing. That's changed now, because now we're seeing that U.S. style of anti-vaccine activism creep into Europe, even Latin America, and even the African continent. So, because I'm at Texas Children's, like where you are, we have a lot of relationships with Mexican institutions and Latin American institutions, and I would for years go down and talk to the Mexican Pediatric Society, the Colombian Pediatric Society, and the first thing I would do is always congratulate them on holding the line of preventing anti-vaccine activism from the U.S. from contaminating those countries. That's all changed now, and the pediatricians are seeing this pretty steep rise in anti-vaccine activism in Latin America, so much so that they translated one of my past books, The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, into Spanish now at the the University of Nuevo León in Monterrey. So I think we're just seeing the beginning of it now. It's creeping into Mexico. It's started now in Europe, and with the same kind of far-right authoritarian links. So the German far-right party, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which some allege have neo-Nazi ties, or even more than allege, has now adopted this. Or you're starting to see it come with Marine Le Pen in the far right in France. So it's become now, anti-vaccine activism, along with the anti-Semitism, has become sort of a new signature of authoritarian regimes. In some ways it makes absolutely no sense, other than the fact that, it's seen as interfering with libertarian concepts, but it's definitely there, and we're starting to see that go more and more, and unfortunately now it's dominating the internet to the point now where a number of pediatricians have come up to me and said, these parents are coming in and the pediatricians are being made to feel like they're not keeping up with the literature. They're just not keeping up with the fake stuff. So one of the big ones is, this Florida Surgeon General, Latipo, says mRNA vaccines are causing turbo cancers because they're delivering a package of nucleic acid that's inserting next to oncogenes. And it sounds very sciencey, right? Until you realize it's all made up, right? It's all BS. I mean, first of all, there's no such thing as turbo cancers. That's a made-up term. And second, the lipid nanoparticle, as Dr. Linzer knows, since we were both MB and B majors, by the way, I was a class of 80 at Yale and you were a class of 76. I'm sure we know some people in common. But that lipid nanoparticle will deliver the package of nucleic acid past the cell membrane into the cytoplasm, but getting things into the nucleus is not easy. It often requires electroporation, and then we have proteins, interferon-inducible elements of our innate immune system that block integration of foreign nucleic acid into genomes. Otherwise, every time we ate a hamburger, we'd have cow DNA into our genome, and much less going next to an oncogene. And the problem is this: I can go on CNN or MSNBC and talk about it, but I'm not reaching the people I really need to reach, or watching Fox News and Joe Rogan podcasts. And I was going on Fox News quite a bit, and then when I wouldn't refuse to go along with the hydroxychloroquine nonsense, they basically cut me off. And so this is one of the big problems also, is access now to the people who need to hear the message most.
Thank you, Dr. Hotez. We have one more question from the audience.
Dr. Hotez, did you get criticized for your work in helping vaccinate the poor nations, the people of poor nations of the world? And do you believe that part of that was because the population was not white?
Yeah, I get it from all sides. So, one of the things that the anti-vaccine activists, the first thing they want to attack me about is they say, well, I'm a shill. The word they use is shill, SHILL, for the pharma companies. And I say, wait a minute, no, we actually made a low-cost COVID vaccine for $2 to $3 a dose that bypassed the big pharma companies. We showed that there's another way to do this, but it doesn't fit their narrative. So that's been useful. What's really interesting is, Elon Musk has now created his own AI program. It's called Grok, and he's using it to compete with ChatGPT and some of the others. And what's really interesting is the anti-vaccine activists try to get validation by asking Grok, and Grok, I'm sure to Elon's chagrin, backs me up every time. So Grok has become my new best friend now. Yeah, I mean, I get some of that. I mean, you can't win for losing. You get it from all sides. But it's gotten pretty dark. And the anti-Semitism. I mean, I've been stalked and going. I spoke at a Reform shul in Houston next to Rice University, and got stalked there by two people who came in and disrupted things. And so hard to say where it's all going at this point. But I think it's going to continue to accelerate. As Mr. Kennedy continues to have that bully pulpit and continue to put out all of the false information about vaccines. And by the way, it's not just vaccines. They're targeting all aspects of biomedical science. So he's now created these pseudo-scientific journals, which are basically WordPress documents that are made to look like journals. He's now going after the mainstream biomedical journals, and even Cell and this kind of stuff, and trying to replace them with his own sets of journals. And a lot of it, I think, is coming from the wellness and influencer movement that wants to create this kind of alternative universe of pseudoscience. So we're seeing quite a bit of that.
Okay, one last question from the audience.
I noticed that Dr. Fauci has to deal with a lot of criticism, as you do. So do you notice a difference between people in your field who are Jewish and not Jewish, that the hate is more directed against Jews rather than non-Jews?
Well, Tony, Dr. Fauci has been a friend and mentor of mine for a long time. I'm 67. He's about 16 years older. He's in his mid-80s now, so he's been a friend and mentor for years. So he's kind of an outlier in the sense of, definitely being a target from the far right. I'm sort of Fauci light, I guess. And so no, it's not only about attacking Jewish scientists, but there's no question that there is, I think one of the panelists, my pediatrician colleague, mentioned, the two circles of the Venn diagram. He's absolutely right. I mean, it's not complete overlap, but there is some overlap. So yeah, it's definitely there. And, what I'm seeing is sort of this freedom to express anti-Semitic viewpoints like I've never seen before. There doesn't even seem to be a lot of self-consciousness about it. And like the others on the panel, as I said, I started out my remarks by saying I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, as a Yale undergraduate and MB in molecular biophysics and biochemistry major. I never experienced it. In New York as an MD PhD student, I never experienced it. Even as a junior faculty, now that's all changed, but it's a relatively recent phenomenon.
Dr. Hotez, thank you again. An apology. I told myself I was going to come up here and invite you all to take a deep breath, because it's a lot. The images are a lot. The stories are a lot. What we're talking about is a lot. It's heavy. So take a deep breath. Sit with that for a minute. I want to give each of our panelists another opportunity to share closing remarks. And if you don't know what you want to say, I would invite you to think about one or two things. What gives you hope in this moment, working in an often polarized environment, and or what does moral courage look like for medical professionals in this moment? Keith, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on something Dr. Hotez just said in response to this last question. I mean, I think one of the reasons, it could be one of the reasons that so much of the anti-science is now anti-vaccine that ties with the anti-Semitism is so many of our vaccines were developed by Jewish scientists. I mean, you go back to the 1950s when you had Sabin and Jonas Salk developing the 2 polio vaccines. They were both Jewish. And then so many, Stanley Plotkin, who developed rubella and rabies and other vaccines, the Hib meningitis vaccine developed by Jewish scientists, Paul Offit at CHOP.
Yeah, John Robinson, Rachel Schneerson, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Paul Offit at CHOP with the rotavirus vaccine, all the way up until, the mRNA COVID vaccine, and Drew Weissman is Jewish, just was one of the 2 people who got the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2023 for it. So I think it's that kind of ties in a little bit with maybe why there's so much of this directed at the vaccine movement. The other thing is just in terms of kind of the irrationality of these conspiracy theories is keep in mind that the same people who have this conspiracy theory about Jews creating COVID virus so that they could then create the COVID vaccine so that they could then get rich selling it, and and this whole through the the head of the head of Pfizer is Jewish and all this this whole conspiracy theory are the same people who have the conspiracy theory that the Chinese developed the vaccine in a lab leak or deliberate or otherwise. So they're holding these 2 conspiracy theories at the same time, and so it tells you that again the facts don't really matter.
I thought that the problems people had with Dr. Fauci was that he was 5'2", and whatever, not necessarily Jewish, and was short people in science, but that's probably not the case. But that was my own theory and conspiracy. No, in all honesty, I think after listening to Dr. Hotez, and I may be repeating myself, is that we have to be diligent in education of our patients, our staff, the people we work with, and also not to be afraid to share our thoughts about this concept of anti-science and why it's wrong. And be proud of that we know and trained in science, we're physicians and educators and Jews, and those are 2 all mutual together because we can make a world a better place. And I want to thank him for tonight to express those kind of thoughts and feelings. Thank you.
There is a scholar at Harvard named Danielle Allen. She's trained as a classicist and studies history and politics as well. And she's written and spoke recently about how, as she puts it, Facebook broke American politics. And her thesis is that in the Federalist Papers, the Founding Fathers argued that there would never be a conspiracy across the country that altered the government because geographically we're so spread out and the few nutcases in different regions would never connect with each other and form an actual conspiracy. And what's happened with social media, she's argued, is that the kind of conspiracy theories that Dr. Hotez is unfortunately the target for get magnified by the ability of these fringe individuals or groups to coalesce around an idea that you can't refute with logic because they won't listen to you. So with AI systems, with, as was just talked about, Musk taking over a major social media platform, what's the solution going forward? To give up to that? Well, I like Dr. Hotez's quote of Einstein that you have to speak out politically or you're abandoning your responsibility. And I can't believe I'm saying this as a scientist who's never been involved in politics, but we have to be actively involved in politics to have people making policies that are rational for public health, are rational for how the internet is spreading malicious information, and how AI might amplify that in the future in ways that could be highly destructive. I hope none of that happens, but we're seeing that happen because of social media right now. And I think we as a Jewish community are probably more aware of this than most communities, given the history of persecution of Jews. But this is a time when I think our collective action is needed more than other times in my life, anyway.
Yeah, I would just, end, I guess, by saying, you're blessed to have such an amazing university, right? University of Arizona in Tucson, which has so many strengths, not only in science and law and medicine and the business community and the humanities. And this is a multidisciplinary problem, and I don't think the solutions are going to come out of one sector. So it's really going to require cooperation, and it's not easy. Universities tend to be pretty siloed. We tend to get credit for writing and speaking for each other in our journals and in our books, but I think this is really going to require an unprecedented level of cross-pollination. I think that's one point. I think a second is we're too invisible. My colleagues at Research America, which is a policy group based in the DC area, they do these surveys every couple of years, and it always comes out to be the same number pretty much, but they still continue to do it, and the number says that 75% of Americans cannot name a living scientist, and the vast majority of Americans cannot name an institution where biomedical research is conducted, and I think part of it is because we're so invisible. I mean, when they try to name a living scientist, usually they start naming Einstein and Jonas Salk, not realizing they've moved on, or when they finally get to it, it's, they name Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, who are wonderful. I love them to death, but they're not, doing what we do, which is struggling over major revisions of papers and grants that don't get discussed at NIH study section and all that kind of stuff. So what we do is invisible to the public, and that allows the bad actors to weaponize what we do and portray us as sort of shadowy figures in white coats plotting all sorts of terrible things. And I think that's another part of science literacy, not just teaching about the second law of thermodynamics, but also what we actually do as scientists. For instance, the guy who's currently our NIH director, who's an economist and former talking head on Fox News, he used to go after me by saying, of course, I'm in a secret cabal with Fauci because I had funding from the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases of the NIH. Well, of course, your entire Department of Microbiology is funded by NIID, and as was his. But, that's the other aspect of science literacy, not just teaching about the actual content of the science, but the processes of science, what a scientist does in making ourselves more sort of visible out there. So that's why I think, what you're doing tonight at the University of Arizona is so important, having these kinds of public engagement forums. That's gold. I can't think of anything more important. So congratulations to you for doing this, and I was glad to be a part of it, even if it was virtual this time.
Dr. Hotez, thank you again, and thank you to our panelists, Dr. Steve Linzer, Dr. Keith Dveirin, and Dr. Steve Wool. I'm Lynn Davis, Director of the Rabbi Joseph H. Gumbiner Community Action Project at Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. And for just a moment, I would like to invite the museum's board chair, Sharon Glassberg, to say a few words.
Good evening, and oh, wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. everyone for being here tonight. You know, Dr. Wool mentioned the collective responsibility we have as Jews vis-a-vis the history that we share and the responsibility to take that history and educate further about that. And I can't imagine anything more pointed to what we're doing here and what we do at the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center. Our mission statement, the first one is to educate. And not only as Jewish physicians and scientists, but as Jews, we have that responsibility to dispel those untruths and conspiracy theories. I work with our community's Holocaust survivors as well. And today during our meeting, we discussed about how important their role is and how much harder it is to hate somebody who is standing in front of you. And the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center, while we're not Pollyanna about it, we know that it is harder for that hatred and those untruths to come through when somebody is educating and when you have the history of the pioneer Jews in Tucson and the history of the Holocaust survivors who made Southern Arizona their home right in front of you. And we'd like to keep the museum the way it is now, open and accessible to all. So you have in front of you information about the next two incredible Lakin Lecture Series, pieces of the Lakin Lecture Series, and I hope you will join us for that. And I also hope that you will join us in our mission to continue to educate, explore, preserve, and collaborate. We like to be open and accessible with no financial barriers, both to the museum and to the programs we put on. So if you could click on that QR code and partner with us in this mission, it would make the world a better place. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you very much.
And drive carefully.